Hey, welcome to the Doty Stew podcast. I'm Brad Doty, and today we have a special guest, Counselor Chuck Stadick. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Chuck, let's talk a little bit about how you found yourself coming to Idaho.
Well, I was born and raised in Minnesota, south central Minnesota, on a farm. Been in ag almost all my life. I graduated from high school, worked for Kraft Foods for a while, and then did my military stints there in the U.S. Army for 3 years.
Go Army.
61 through 64. And my parents actually moved out to California while I was in the Army. And I went back to Minnesota for a while, and they just said, you gotta have your pot of gold out here in California. So I did come out there and actually went back after I was out there, married my high school sweetheart. We're on 61 years, by the way.
Very nice, and happy Mother's Day to her.
Yeah, right. And anyway, we were down there for a little while, but when you're used to the outdoors like I was, the whole family was, we actually wanted to go someplace else. It got pretty crowded down there, smog and all the other stuff that goes along with California. But my wife's sister married a Marine down at Camp Pendleton, and he's a native of Payette. So after they got married, they invited us up here to Idaho about 3-4 years in a row, different times of the year on vacation, and we loved it. And she said, well, if you're looking for a job, maybe you can work for Simplot. And I said, who the heck is Simplot? Didn't know.
Yes.
And so I went down to the old employment office in Caldwell, which is, I think it was on Blaine and 10th, and filled out an application, went back home again. I was in the retailing business at that time. And about 3 months later, got a call from you-know-who, Simplot. So I flew up here I think it was 3 separate times, and they kind of eliminated everybody each trip. And I finally got in the top 3, I think it was. And I didn't think too much about it. Like I said, I didn't know a doggone thing about potatoes except how to eat them. And lo and behold, about a month later, they called again, said, you got the job, and you need to be up here. Was the week before Thanksgiving. So we put our house up for sale, and it sold right away, and we're up here. We've been up here since 1977. So
1977. Yeah. And how long did you work for Simplot?
Just under 30 years. I retired in about 2005 or 6, something like that.
2005 or 6. Then you found yourself interested in Caldwell politics.
Well, I had a tough supervisor, but he taught me a lot. And he's the type of guy that says, I remember the first day in office, he came in and he said, understand they hired you for this raw procurement job. I was in food division is what I was in. I said, yeah. And he says, well, I just want to set the record straight. He said, I'm not the kind of guy that's going to pat you on the back, but you screw up and you're going to have hell to pay. So that was a pretty good introduction. Yeah. But he taught me a lot, and he was tough to work for, but very fair. And he decided to retire, and I actually filled his shoes after he retired as raw procurement director for the Simplot Company. But I started out as a fieldman over in Nissan, Parma, and Ontario. That's how I got started.
So at some point, then you decided to run for Caldwell City Council. So what sparked that decision?
It was part of the supervisor that I had. He said, instead of complaining about it, get it fixed. And I was tired of paying the high taxes. I moved into our home when we bought it around 2008, I think it was, and our taxes were $2,000 roughly at that time of year, and all of a sudden the next year they went up to $4,200, and I said, what in the world's going on here? So I got involved a little bit, went to the meetings and everything, and I decided, well, heck, I'm going to run for office and see if I can't do something about it for the ordinary taxpayer. So
that's really key, right? Attending the meetings and learning what actually goes on and what you can actually do with government money and what you cannot do with government money.
Yeah.
And being actively involved.
Yeah.
One of those topics that's at the forefront right now is the quiet zone.
Right.
So the quiet zone has passed council and is being put into motion. Can you explain what your position is on the quiet zone and why it's important?
Yeah, I support it. In fact, I'll tell you a little story. I think it was Saturday afternoon. There was some 2 young ladies there at the recall station on 10th, and I just stopped in to see what they had to say. And the first thing they asked me, would you sign the list? And I said, well, no, I won't, but tell me what you're all about. And they said, well, are you for the quiet zone? I said, no, I'm against it. And they hadn't recognized me yet. And they finally did after about 5 minutes. But I told them why. I said, we need more commercial and industrial in this city to help pay for the taxes that we have and reduce the liability that the homeowners had. And this Roger Brooks project will do exactly that. And it's not, we're not going into ag ground or anything like that. It's from Centennial Way all the way over to Stadick, and in that corridor, and then from north, the interstate, south to Cleveland or Blaine, it's like an infill project. And if we don't get that soon, I said, our taxes are going to even go up higher as far as property owners are concerned.
Right. And I think it's important to establish goals, right? Even if you don't get to accomplish each one of those goals, you have to have a plan and a direction that you're trying to move to.
Exactly. And like I say, we did, we've had too much growth. I wouldn't argue that point at all over the many years I've been. This is my third term, by the way, 9 years now.
Yes, it is.
And we've had too much growth, and we haven't had. It's really off balance right now because most of what we have, and that's about just under 9,000 projects that have been approved but haven't been built yet, and most of that is homes, subdivisions, not commercial industrial. And if we don't get commercial industrial in here, and we built that just under 9,000 projects, our taxes are even go up higher, and we can't afford to have that happen.
Yeah, I agree. The commercial is what pays roughly 20% of the tax, and residential pays 8%. And when you don't have enough commercial balancing the budget, well, then that comes off the back of the homeowner. Yeah.
Optimum, when I look at the percentages versus commercial, industrial, and residential, I would like to see probably about 60% commercial or residential and 40% commercial, industrial. And there's a little bit in there in ag ground too, but it's like 1 or 2%. It doesn't mean a lot.
Yeah, and oftentimes the stats are updated on that. Do you know where the city currently sits?
No, I don't. No.
Okay.
No.
You happened to mention the recall a little bit earlier. What are your thoughts on the recall? Do you think it divides the town, or does it bring the town together, or just what are your general thoughts on the recall?
Yeah, I don't. There's a lot of people that voted for the different counselors, and not just 3 or 4 or 500. A lot of people in the thousands. And all Mr. Tillman did was bring forth something that should have been brought forth when Mayor Wagner was there, as far as voting on the quiet zone. And I think he's caught a lot of unnecessary negative, stuff, whether it's true or not. But he brought it forward. He had the nerve to do it, and he was allowed to do it, and it had to be voted on. Now, whether it got voted on this year or next year or whatever, it should have been voted on a long time ago. And it's just unnecessary what he's going through right now because, like I say, there's more people that voted for him than are against him. So.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, and it's oftentimes you hear they're not listening to the people, but yet Councilor Tillman was voted in by the people.
Right.
So he is the sitting councilman, only just a few months on, and they certainly are willing to give a break to anyone that's usually 3 or 4 months on, unless you don't agree with them specifically.
Yeah.
So,
well, I asked those 2 young ladies, said, "Why are you recalling Mr. Tillman?" And then they said, "He doesn't listen to the people." And I said, "Well, which people do you think he's not listening to?" And he said, "All of us." And I said, "Well, I know of a lot of people that are in favor of the quiet zone just because of the tax structure that'll come from it." So I said, "I really don't know what you mean by all the people, because it's not true." So.
Right. And you sat in, back to the quiet zone, then you sat in on a lot of those meetings as well and listened to the experts. And I think sometimes if you don't attend those meetings or don't hear all of that and you believe only what you read, sitting in that meetings affords you the opportunity to ask questions and listen to what is said directly versus just writing something or saying something that somebody may have shared after their opinion. We've all had those experiences in our training and education where you start the sentence at the beginning of the room, and by the end of the room, what is the sentence that was said?
Yeah, there's a lot of false perceptions out there right now. Even these ladies had some false numbers too relative to the recall numbers and everything else. And if you don't sit in on the meetings, you're just behind the 8 ball if you don't, because you don't have the right information, period.
Right, and it seems like some are they'll say, make sure we do the infill, which it sounds like what you promote, and it's certainly what a lot of counselors promote. And then you mentioned Roger Brooks' plan, right? All infill projects.
Exactly. Yeah, but see, they'll tell you that one of the comments they made to me is, "Well, did you hear they're going to destroy 50 or 100 homes along the railroad tracks. I said, gosh, I didn't hear that. And I've been in most of Mr. Brooks's projects presentations. And, that's news to me. And I said, I don't think that's going to happen. I said, just think you got some false information there.
Yeah, and I think the worry, or what I've heard, is the urban renewal, right, is going to take over this area, and then gentrification is what you always hear. But something to remember is someone could come in and buy all of that right now.
Sure.
And as long as they develop under the comp plan, there wouldn't be a thing the city can do about it. One good thing, and you sit on urban renewal, that at least urban renewal can have some control over what happens
Exactly.
if you have a plan in place and you're moving forward.
Yeah, mentioning that one particular item that came up, I said, well, did you hear about the latest infill that we approved out on Karcher between South Indiana and 10th? And they said, yeah, we're just totally against that, too much growth. I said, well, who owns that property? And they didn't know. I said, well, the Seventh-day Adventists own that property. And I said, the reason I approved it is because there are going to be some nice homes in the project, but they're also going to build commercial industrial along Karcher Road between South Indiana and 10th. And I said, that's why I voted for it. And they didn't know that. They didn't know the commercial part. They thought it was all homes. But it's commercial, too. And I said, it's a good project, and it's infill, too. It's not taking up ag ground. And so, again, that's information they didn't have before, but they have it now. So
that's right. And most say they're from a conservative background, but we've all heard about the NIMBY theory, but not in my backyard.
Exactly.
And so certainly if you have a comp plan in place and folks want to do what they want to do with their land, then the comp plan should be followed, right? That's the whole point of the plan.
Well, sure. And over the history that I've been a counselor for 9 years now, if you look back, if there's a project where you're in a subdivision, you're going to build a subdivision, and the subdivision next to it is a single family dwellings, and you want to build, fourplexes or threeplexes, I will not vote for that, because when you look down in people's backyards, I wouldn't want it to happen, and I don't expect everybody else to happen either. The project over there on 10th and Eustick that we just discussed by Walgreens, they wanted to put in 2-story family dwellings there next to the Cumberland Estate project. And I voted against that. I said, you can't do that, because, again, the privacy of the homeowners that are there already, you just don't have that. And I said, originally you were supposed to build all commercial on the Eustick side of 10th or west side of 10th. And I said, I think we need to stick to the commercial stuff and not build homes in there. So I voted against it.
Yes, and I was present for that as well. And I think most of the time it seems that the developers are willing to listen to the request of the council. And I also think sometimes the confusion is, well, planning and zoning denied this. But a lot of times, on my experience, and I'd like to hear what yours is the developers heard what's come out of planning and zoning, and sometimes before it gets to council, they have corrected some of those concerns. Is your experience the same?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And those concerns that plan and zoning had after they correct, a lot of times they don't hear about that until it comes to council. So that's the difference. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a good way to do it. If another committee has recognized an issue or a problem that may be concerning, that you correct it before you go on to the next step.
And Mr. Harmon and company that are on plan and zoning, I mean, there's a lot of sharp minds on that plan and zoning, and they've had projects they rejected too, or recommended to the council reject, and rightfully so, because it just didn't match what we had planned in the future, especially relative to commercial industrial. But you have a lot of good heads on that plan and zoning committee.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And most, if not all of those, are all volunteer positions. And
Exactly.
I think, so anyone in the community that wants a voice or a part of those committees or a voice in their city, you can certainly join. And there always seems to be a struggle getting applicants to join these committees.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you talk about, there's a lot of people, I think, that even think the counselors get paid a lot. I had a couple of complaints from some homeowners at one time. I think it was my first or second term. So I kept track of my hours for 2 months, and it turned out to $1.75 an hour. And I said, if you want to do that for it, come on in and do it and run against me. But I don't do it for the money. I do it for the community.
Yeah, and I think very small cities, counselors may not put in as much time. I'm just talking in generalities. I'm certain that there's counselors out there working diligently, even in our small cities. But as Caldwell grows and continues to get bigger, the amount of time our counselors put into that is remarkable, really. And we have to remember most of them have a day job. There's a few that are
Exactly.
retired,
Yeah.
but it certainly takes a lot of time and commitment from those folks. And appreciating their work, whether you agree with them or not, at least they're willing to step up and sit
Yeah.
on those committees.
Well, you know as well I do, Brad, when you were on the council, on average, we have anywhere from 700 to 800 pages of stuff to go through before a meeting, and you just don't do that overnight. I mean, if you're gonna be effective as a counselor, you go through all those pages and see what the information is, and then that will depend on what your vote is, obviously. So
Yes, and I think it could certainly be a full-time job, and
Yeah.
so those putting in that time and effort should certainly be rewarded or at least acknowledged, even if you disagree with them, and not maybe receive concerns of bodily harm to them for submitting their time. Is the
we've
way I
had
put
that for can't tell you how long, but it's been brutal. I'll tell you, not to mention the emails and the threats and everything else to counselors, including myself. But you've had them too when you were on the council, and it's just a shame that people go to those kind of extents to voice their opinion when they don't want to do anything about anything. If you're upset with us, then run against us. That's what I tell everybody that comes to me about those complaints. So.
That's right. That's right. Go sit on a committee and learn what it's all about before
Yep.
criticizing the committee.
Exactly.
And then how about I received a notification there was some concern with maybe the mayor not telling the complete truth, and you had written quite a nice response is what I received is look at Chuck's response in regards to that. Could you remind us what that was about and what the point was you were trying to get across?
Well, I was trying to think about what it was because I've done that quite a bit with the mayor lately. Which project? Do you remember which one I was talking about?
I don't remember. I just got a screenshot of it, and it went on to social media. And well, do you have an example that's coming to mind? And maybe
I keep telling him the honeymoon's over, and he needs to get down to doing the city business. And as well as I do that I'm in favor of city manager. That he helps the mayor out, and the council would be responsible for the city manager. And it's to put it simply, the mayor would go out there and kiss the baby, shake hands, talk to the businessman, see whether there's any problems that he can bring to the council. But the city manager would actually operate the day-to-day business, and that's the way it should be, especially with the size of the population that we have in Caldwell. And during my prior life with Simplot, I traveled all over the United States and Canada and even internationally, looking for places to grow potatoes, to build plants for McDonald's at that time. They were our largest customer. And every city that I went to, and this is small town stuff, every city I went to, if they had a city manager, we always got the right answers. They are always correct, and we got them, in a reasonable amount of time. If it was just a mayor, we had to wait weeks, sometimes months. So I think a city manager, especially with this population we have now, is very important. And I expressed that to the mayor, and I'm not sure that I just don't know what side he's on that. I know that he'll probably say he wants a city manager, but exactly what the responsibilities are, I think that's where the problems lie.
right, and the city manager or a chief of staff can focus on the city business all day long.
Exactly.
While we know the mayor is, I won't call it distracted because those events may be important too, but certainly it's hard to deal with a water issue for 4 hours if that's what it takes, if your day is planned with visiting certain areas. So divide and conquer, right?
Yeah, I'll give you a larger example on that. It was the former public works director, when we had the impact fee committee together and we revised all our impact fees, we lost about $1.2 million that one year. And the reason for that, nobody put the final decision making as far as what those fees would be into our computer system, and a city manager would take care of that. Now, our former mayor didn't catch it, and we didn't collect the money, and we can't go back to the developers and collect it now. So we're at, $1.2 million is a lot of money for us, especially when you look at the budgets this year where we're going to have a shortfall, because the idea that I think the mayor and part of his group has put out there that there's going to be a moratorium on building. So now the folks that want to build, the building permits where we get a lot of our money from, they're way down, up to 50% right now, and it's going to be a shortfall on the budget. Now our finance director, Mrs. North, she's done a heck of a great job in trying to put something together where we can save some more money, and the impact isn't quite as much. But we're still looking at a little over $500,000 shortfall.
Yes, and I think that's a good point to bring out. Is it was 1.2, and I think even
Yeah.
sometimes people they've stretched that to 1.5, and they failed to mention well now it's at 400,000, and
Yep.
so
Yep.
yes, Raylan North deserves lots of kudos, and my background with her, and
Yeah.
she educated me on how finances work in government, and so
It's a credit to you that we were able to steal her from ISP. So
thank
she's
you.
been terrific.
She's
really.
phenomenal. She's
Yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned moratorium, and I think that's some of the worry is even though there's not a moratorium in place, simply mentioning the word
Mm-hmm.
certainly makes people worried or concerned that may be the direction the city
Yeah.
goes.
When you look at millions and millions of dollars that these folks have to put in a project before any house is built, you can see why they're concerned. And I think that the mayor's going to have to right that ship, because right now everybody thinks out there, the developers think that we're going to have a moratorium. Now, I'm against that type of growth if it gets into ag ground, but infill, as long as it's the right type of project, not two-story buildings going into single-family dwellings, I don't have a problem with that. And the other thing too, that problem that we have is I've talked to the county commissioners about this. They're releasing way too much ag ground, to the city. The city does not solicit annexation. A lot of people don't understand that. They think we go out and advertise and want to annex all these different projects, but we don't do that. The county commissioners release the ground in the county, and then they expect the city to annex it. And that's got to stop, because a lot of these people that are running for county commissioner or on the commissioner currently, that's one of their platforms when they got elected. We're going to save ag ground. Well, the performance isn't there. They haven't been saving ag ground at all. And does the farmer have a right to sell his ground? Sure he does. But on the other hand, if we had some policy in place where maybe he could lease the ground out to other people, that might be a solution. Or, there's seed associations, there's vegetable associations out there that might even buy the ground from the grower. They can't buy them at the price that the developers have, but at least save the ag ground that way, and it's just not happening. And then when they extended the impact zone down to Wagner, I was really upset over that, because Farmway was kind of the line in the sand for me. You don't go any further west, because all the revenue that's brought in by agriculture, and a lot of people just don't realize how much that is. We need that, for our state and to remain healthy from a revenue standpoint.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember that there are many state laws in place, and oftentimes you can't just say it's just no, right? Like you have to have a comp plan in place. So
Right.
I get when someone buys the land, what the comp plan says is what their rights are to that land. Now they can certainly come ask council for a waiver or an exception to that. However, you do have to have an area of impact, and you do have to allow people to develop. You cannot just stop. And I think the moratorium, when you mention that, something has to be in peril. And if it's just, well, we don't want it because we like small town Caldwell, that becomes quite challenging in court.
Absolutely. And, I'm looking into Mile Hero County, Oregon right now, because they supposedly have a policy that protects ag ground. And we're looking into that. Some of the other councils are too. But I can't tell you how many folks I've had come in from the wineries, the beet folks, some of the potato folks, the grain folks, and they're really concerned about, the amount of ground that's being taken up by the developments right now. The Chickasaw project, which is west of Farmway, is a good example of that off of Homedale. As far as I'm concerned, that should have never happened. I voted against it. But again, that's excellent farm ground out there. A lot of the seed industry protested that, but again, they didn't have enough people to change other people's minds on that. But anyway, there's a lot of concern about the ag groups out there and all the ground that's being taken on subdivisions. And what happens is sometimes a farmer will allow maybe a quarter of acre or something to be sold to somebody that wants to build a nice home out in the country. Well, you get too many of those little quarter acres, and finally that piece of ground, the pivot, and they're usually about 125 acres, is surrounded by these little parcels of homes, and that restricts their ability to take care of their crop relative to the certain spray hours, the chemicals and fertilizers that they can put on it, the whole shot of wax when it comes to growing a crop. It restricts them, and that's where the problem lies. And finally, they just get tired of hearing all the complaints and They just sell the ground and that's it. But those parcels are eaten up by that kind of a program.
Yeah, and it's tough because we've had people come on in front of council before as well, and the farmer has spent their, well up into their retirement years. The tradition of passing that ground down to the next generation stops.
Right.
And at what point do you keep, I won't say penalizing the farmer, but the farmer's like, well, I'm 80 years old. I'd like to enjoy just a few years here. I can't get anyone to buy my ground. I can't get a farmer to farm or lease the ground. My children don't want the ground. So please let me sell it so I can do something with it in my later years in life so I can enjoy just a little bit. And that's awfully challenging too.
Yeah. Well, that's where these other organizations come in, though. The seed organization, the potato organization, the beet organization. If they would communicate with each other, or even the Canyon County commissioners would talk to these folks about selling the ground to see if anybody would be interested in it, I think a lot of the problems would be solved. For instance, the latest Valley View School District fiasco on selling that ground out there or buying that ground out there by Deer Flat Church. I don't know if you heard about that one, but anyway, there was one grower that called me and said he would have bought that ground had he known it was up for sale, but it was done kind of in-house, I heard, and the school district paid a lot of money for it. And then they said, sooner or later the city's going to be out there. And I checked with our planning and zoning committee, and they said that they were going to be out there. We were going to be out there between 5 and 10 years. And our planning and zoning director said there's no way that's going to happen because it's a long distance out there from Farmway. So.
Yeah, and since you mentioned the schools, that's an issue, right? Because they want to complain about the growth or about the amount of students coming into their buildings, and then something like that happens.
Right.
Whether right, wrong, or indifferent is not for me to decide. I imagine that might end up in court somewhere. But does it sit right? And whether it's ends up being ultimately right or not, does it sit right with the public? And it's awfully hard to come in and advise councils, not just Caldwell's, but around our area, because I think it's important to remember that districts go beyond Caldwell city limits.
Right.
And then say, hey, we have too many students in here and we don't have enough money to build new schools. And then you get that incident where, the value of the ground, certainly on its face value, was overpaid for the value of the ground. But yet you're saying don't build anymore because we don't have any more room.
Right. Well, I think our education system is broken, period. I talked to Mr. Palmer, who's the assistant superintendent for Valley View, many, many times over the last 5 or 6 years about what we need to do to correct that. And part of the problem is when you look at the rankings of the Valley View School District in Caldwell, out of 186 high schools in Idaho, they're up in the 150s and 160s, which isn't a very good ranking. And then you look at some of the charter schools that we have in Caldwell, like Vision and some of the other ones, they're ranked in the top 10. So what's the difference? I looked into that, and it seems like our high schools are concentrating on diversity, sports, and some of these other things rather than education. And that just doesn't set well, with the future of our not only our city, but our state and our country too. And I think that's where the problem lies. And then you look over at Napa, and they've got empty classrooms. Caldwell High School even has some empty classrooms. So why can't those folks work together? But there's so many turf battles going on between districts now. That's where the problem lies, and they need to get together and solve it.
There is. So again, do we really want to do something about it? And then when push comes to shove, it's, well, but I went to this school and I want my child to go to this school. But you're absolutely right. As elementary schools are sitting empty or closing in one district, we're asking people in another district to pay more taxes. And all it would take is a boundary change.
Yeah.
But man, you start talking about changing the boundary, and then you have a whole nother argument or debate or concern on your hands. And some of it's just tradition, not even what would be best for the kids. It's just,
we did it like this all the time, so why change it? That's not the right answer.
Yeah, and you have to continue to grow and experience that. And I think it's also important to remember that even if Caldwell did a moratorium, that doesn't mean anywhere around you. You mentioned the county. People often forget and that the county's growing too.
Absolutely.
Those commissioners get to make decisions as to what's going on in the county, and all of our surrounding cities that don't have a moratorium, well, they're just going to go there, and they may include the district that you're trying to prevent from more kids going to the school. We've heard Middleton talk about that. about their struggles. That did it prevent anything from going to their school? And at least in the presentations I was a part of, no, the enrollment still continued to go up. They just moved to a different location. So
yeah, well, I always complain that over 20% of my taxes every year are school bonds, and it shouldn't be that way. And when our kids went to school, here's another problem. Our kids went to school; they went parochial school, except when they got into high school. So people keep calling me and ask me, why do I need to pay all these taxes when I'm paying for my kids to go to parochial school? And they've got a good point. They're not using the facility at all, and so that's something that I think they need to overcome too.
they do, and the counter debate I've heard on that is oftentimes you and I went to schools that were paid for by someone else as well, and so to pay it forward to the next generation. So there's definitely debates on both sides of. I mean, my high school is still there. I have no idea who paid for that, and my little town certainly can't afford a new one.
Well, when I went to high school, it was tuition, and it wasn't outside money. It was just tuition, and it was expensive. There's no doubt about it. But my parents had enough money to do it, so I always appreciated that.
Yeah, and you brought up another issue. I think as we grow, there are more and more charter schools. There are more and more private schools, and so oftentimes when it's said, well, look at the ratings of these public schools. Well, depending on what your interest is or what direction you want your child to go or what direction they want to go, sometimes those private schools or charter schools draw the more education-focused individuals, which are pulling that out of your public school. Public schools may be focused. I don't have any data on that, but I understand where you're coming from on sports and extracurricular activities, of course, with an education on top of it. But when you go into these multi-million-dollar high school football fields, which is very common in the South or East or Midwest,
right?
That certainly can be a point of contention. And you go to a private school and they have a gym that the officials can barely run up and down the sidelines because they have closed that thing off because that's not their priority. So
being a referee, you know well how that happens.
I still volunteer for my community and some officiating, that's for sure. And you can definitely tell the difference in those schools.
Yeah, and we have 2 grandkids that are going to the vision school right now. And I'll tell you, the education system, the whole program, the academia and everything is so much different in a public school than what they were used to before. And I think another thing that's lacking is parent participation too. When you go to a vision school, you have to participate as a parent. If you don't, your child doesn't get to go there. Simple as that. And I think our other public schools are lacking that. When I talked to Mr. Palmer here about 6-7 years ago, I asked him to give me a copy of their Manning chart to see how many assistants we had. And I forget what the total number was, but I took about, if I was king for a day, I took about 13 positions out of that because they were just doubling up on assistants. And of course I asked him, I said, so why can't you do this? He said, oh no, we have too many students to take care of, and our whole academia would be lacking if we took all these people out. Well, again, I'm from a business standpoint. That's where my background. A lot of the former mayors have told me you can't run a city like a business, and I tell them that you're absolutely wrong. You've got so much money coming on taxes, grants, and that type of revenue, and this is what your costs are to keep the city going and the services that everybody wants. So what's the difference?
That's right. And oftentimes I know we sat down and made several suggestions for cuts out of the budget, and you just find where to do that. And it's not always a popular decision, but sometimes that's necessary to have a balanced budget, which is by state statute the responsibility of the council. And I think oftentimes our constituents forget that that the council sets the budget.
Right.
The mayor can certainly have an opinion and certainly prepares a budget for the council to consider, but in the end, by state law, it's the council that makes the decisions, the tough decisions, and decides where the budget will expand and where it will shrink.
Well, you know as well as I do, you talk about the state, between Mr. Bethke and Mr. Moyle and Mr. Harris, they've been thorns in my side for a long time. House Bill 389, for instance, where the cities can only take a certain percentage of the cost, and they have to apply that to infrastructure, and then they think they know how to run a city better than we do, And when you look at the deficit that the state has, it makes you wonder a little bit whether they do know how to run the city better than do. I don't think they do, but they've stymied a lot of our growth relative to H Bill 389, House Bill 389, and it doesn't allow the cities to pay for all this infrastructure that we need to do. And why in the world they came up with that, I'll never know. But I do have a theory on that. Mr. Betke, for instance, he's a rancher. He doesn't have a lot of city property, I don't think. It's mostly ag. Mr. Moyle lives over in Star. I think he's got a lot of ag and industrial and commercial, probably hardly any city. And I don't know about Mr. Harris, but I think between the Betke and Moyle, sometimes you wonder where their hearts really are and if they're trying to protect their part of the tax spectrum versus the homeowners. And I'm hoping that with some of the new members that I think are going to get elected in the state legislature, that thing is going to be turned around and be a lot more fair for the homeowners. So.
Yes. House Bill 389 was certainly detrimental.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the hot button words right now is enclaves. Do you happen to have any opinion on enclaves or what you think?
Not really. You look at everything differently and the background information on it, and it just depends on what you see and what you read.
Yeah. So as more information comes out, maybe a varying opinion of what direction that should go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, let's get into something that might be a little bit more fun to talk about, and maybe not. But what do you feel? You've served 3 terms now. You're in your third.
I'm on my third term.
On your third. What's a recent tough decision that you've had to make? And maybe we've covered it today, but maybe you can share with us one that we haven't covered today. What's one of the toughest decisions you've had to make as a city councilman?
Well, I think, this Roger Brooks project's been going on for some time. For the folks that don't know, he's the original brains behind the Indian Creek Plaza. I mean, he did a great job with that. And I think that when people look at projects like that, they always think that the taxes are going to go up, but they don't understand the difference between the personal property tax and the commercial industrial. And, there's a fine line there. I know that. And they always think that, well, we're only putting money into everybody else's pocket except the homeowners, the folks that own the businesses. But, without those businesses being there, we probably wouldn't have a town. It's as simple as that. And trying to explain that to people on every one of these projects that comes up is probably the hardest thing a counselor has to do, especially when you get the phone calls or the emails. And you know as well as I do that we always get blamed for taking money under the table and all that kind of stuff. And I'm really proud to tell people that I have not taken any money from anybody, not even taxpayers, on all the 3 terms that I've been elected. It's been my own money, and I've had some outside offers. In fact, my former company, Simplat Company, offered to help with my campaign over the years, and I just refused it because people get blamed, councilors get blamed for too much of that, and I think to stop that, if you don't take money from developers and other taxpayers, I think you have a little bit more independency relative to decisions that you have to make. So
yeah,
that's probably one of the toughest part of it right there.
You've certainly done an excellent job at that, and sometimes it's confusing as to how, but look at you, 3 terms, so that's a pretty good track record.
I must be doing something a little bit right, I guess.
That's right. Well, I sat next to you for 4 years, and I have nothing but respect for you. We often, maybe not even often, sometimes disagreed, and we were always able to talk it out versus being angry at each other, and then now there's no relationship there at all. I think there's a Ronald Reagan quote, and of course the people that listen to this may get after me, but I'm not gonna try and quote it directly. But we used to consider someone that agreed with us 80% of the time as a friend, not a foe. And it seems like now, if you do not agree 100% of the time with what an individual thinks, they just write you off, and you never know what you're going to get as the next replacement.
Yeah.
And if you can agree 80% of the time, those are pretty good odds, and those are
absolutely
a pretty good friend to have that agrees with you 80% of the time.
Well, my problem with the recalls is that it's the minority folks that are really doing the recalls. I mean, the minority meaning, the 300 or 400 or 500 folks. Well, what about the other thousands of folks that voted for the gentleman? That's in there right now.
That's right.
And are they going to recall everybody every time they disagree with one of our decisions.
Certainly seems that way.
I was on a recall list at one time, and one of the folks that we had talked about before our podcast here, he actually called me and apologized for what that certain group was doing relative to the recall, and said, about the only thing that we disagree on is the quiet zone. And I said, well, I'll tell you exactly why I'm for the quiet zone. And I told him, and he said, I fully understand it, but there's no reason for him not to support me in the future because of that, because we just have a difference of opinion. And most of it on the quiet zone is safety. And a lot of people don't realize that here's the problem. They were told that horn or the train whistle stays off all the time. That
Right.
is not true. If under the quiet zone specifications, if an engineer of that train sees some danger on the track, he has to, by law, blow his whistle. It does not stay silent. And there's still people out there that thinks that the whistle stays silent no matter what. That's not true. And those are kind of the smaller details, I guess, that people run into relative not having the knowledge behind why we vote like we do.
Right, and all the safety measures they have in place. And yes, I've read some of that where I don't know if they thought we remove it completely off the train. It still has to traverse through several areas that they will still need to use their horn.
Absolutely.
Also, always capable of using the horn if there's a concern or an issue around the railroad tracks.
Yeah, I had a discussion here with a couple of people about a month ago. They were complaining to me that we're just going to fill the pockets of the businessmen downtown. And I said, well, in my former career in the ag business, I said I had my office downtown in the Studenberg building. And I said, I was here when hustle and bustle downtown, everybody's having a great time. People were making money. People were happy. They had a lot of restaurants to go to and everything. And I was also here in the downturn back in the 2007-8s. And I just tell them, I said, I sure as heck don't want our town to go back to the 2007s and 8s because it wasn't any fun, because there was hardly anybody downtown. And I said, without those business people, yeah, they're out there to make money, but they were there when we were very successful downtown back in the 70s and 80s. And they were also there when we didn't have very much success downtown, and they took it in the shorts. So, but we have to have those commercial industrial people down there to offset the tax base for property owners and to keep our community going.
Yeah, and a lot of times I think it's lost on us because we often think, every developer is rich. Well,
Right.
not the brand new guy trying to get started. He certainly isn't. Now,
Exactly.
are there? Absolutely. No different than there's businessmen that are very wealthy. But some of these businesses in town are literally just making it each month and supplying other families with a paycheck.
Absolutely.
So not everybody has just this money falling out of their pockets.
Well, destination call is exactly what it means. We'd like to have people come in and spend their money. And I had one gentleman, for instance, that was on this group that supports the mayor. He said to me, he says, well, I've been down at Indian Creek Plaza one time this year and I don't drink beer. And I said, well, what about the other 1,000 people that do drink beer or wine and enjoy the entertainment and everything else? I said, are you going to jeopardize because you don't like that part of it just for the other thousands of people that do? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
No, it does not. And then oftentimes those are the folks putting in the risks.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars.
Yeah.
We have our award-winning Amanos, right? That wasn't cheap for them to move to there, and there were many other cities welcoming them to move out of Caldwell, and they took the chance on Caldwell, but they also took the risk of millions of dollars to put that in.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and the Brooks project, a lot of people still say we have a parking problem, and we do. There's no doubt about that. And you were there during the parking meter fiasco, but
yes,
we have some investors right now that are willing to invest in a parking garage downtown. I mean, they're going to foot the bill for it. Of course, they're going to charge you for, parking there, but still, we do have investors that would do that. They think that Caldwell has got enough of a future that they're willing to invest that kind of money into it. So it's that project and a lot of other projects that people don't know about are going to benefit our downtown. And, when I looked at my platform when I first started running for office, my platform is I'm the taxpayer's advocate. I've stood behind that, and I still do. And if it's good for the homeowner and business, then I'll vote for it. If it's not, then either side, then I won't vote for it. But taxpayers come first in my opinion.
it's not a bad position to have.
Well, we have mostly taxpayers out there.
What's your number one concern for the city of Caldwell right now?
if we don't get the Brooks project in place and operating, I think we're probably going to go back to what we saw in the '80s, where a downturn in our businesses in downtown Caldwell, and I think the homeowners are going to get hit with some pretty high taxes because they don't share it with industrial and commercial folks, and that's not going to be very attractive either. But I think that's the biggest problem we have right now. If we don't do the Brooks project, there's nothing else out there that I know of that we're going to do or anybody's going to do to bring in more commercial industrial. And I think we're not going to die on the vine, but it's going to be a tax nightmare for all the property owners.
Right, and it's important to remember that those taxes go to police and fire mostly.
Yep, exactly.
Most of our taxes go to police and fire services. So
Yep.
if you cut the head off that snake,
Mm-hmm.
then and you think police and fire are struggling now, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, and we could have the same situation Star has. We've got a new fire station that's supposed to go up, but guess what? At the last meeting, our fire chief said we got to have people to man it, and right now we don't have the money to do that.
No, and that comes from hopefully building more businesses, but certainly homes that pay all those impact fees. And I think it's important to remember on the impact fees, it can only go towards growth.
Exactly.
So just a strange, I guess, example of that is if you already have a 2-lane road and it needs to go to 4 lanes, it's important to remember that those fees can only go to the 2 additional lanes. So even if you replace all 4 at once, then the city is still responsible under its current status to replace the 2 that exist.
Right.
And again, if you're unhappy with how that is, that's all done by state legislature, not by city ordinance. So they are paying millions and millions of dollars impact fees, and all in accordance with state law. And then it's often forgotten that all has to be spent within a certain amount of time as well. And the price of everything is going up. When I see, I could do that roundabout. I could get my friend off his backhoe to come in and dig that roundabout out or that swimming pool out. And well, no. And then you have to be licensed and bonded. And then who does the city hold accountable for that?
Exactly.
Right. And with licensing and bonding increases the fee for the construction company. And so that's why the price of things are higher than just having someone come in off their family farm tractor and fixing a city project.
Yeah, we're not at that stage anymore. And, talk about sins of the past. Impact fees was another sin of the past. We're supposed to visit it, I think, every 5 years, something like that is what state statute says. And I can remember my first term, I had asked the question, well, when did we look at impact fees? And it was at least 10 years before we did. And, a lot of the businessmen downtown and the developers, too, will say, well, if the impact fees get too high like California, nobody's going to build anything. Well, our impact fees were so low, it was sad, just pathetic. It really was. So the impact fee committee has been working on that to bring us back up to where we should be. But again, when we don't collect those impact fees, we get further and further behind on keeping our streets up, on maintenance and our sewer and everything else that we supply services to our taxpayers. And that's why, again, I think a city manager needs to be in place to keep track of those things and make sure our business goes on.
And, I used to attend those impact fee meetings, a part of the ones where you're talking about.
Yeah.
But you don't see a single citizen in there attending those. And so it's very important to get involved in your community and go to those and go sit in an impact fee committee, not just one, but go to several, and you'll start to learn more and more about how impact fees work. And again, our volunteers from our community sitting on these and the tough decisions they're struggling over with each other to make these decisions. They're not just in there off a whim. They are devoting time and effort, asking good questions, and trying to determine the best route for the city as well. And we'll always be behind on impact fees unless we can't go back in time. When the wagons were coming across here, we should have been collecting impact fees.
Exactly.
But we weren't, right?
That's extreme, but you're absolutely right.
The city used to come together if the town needed a new, whatever it was, road, church, well, they all got together and did that. As we all become more individualized, well, now cities are responsible for doing that. And so impact fees came about that's how we collect that and how we do that. But all those years that all of that stuff was done, unless you went back to the beginning of a city's history to collect impact fees, then you're always going to be just a step behind. If you stop collecting them, then your current level of police, fire services will drop as well.
Yeah. Well, look at the complaints, and you were on the council when we raised the garbage and water fees. I mean, average was $20 a month, but a lot of these fixed income folks don't have $20 a month to spare, and that's what happens when you don't have the proper structure there for impact fees and all the other services that the city is supposed to supply.
Right.
The taxpayer. So.
Exactly, and it's much different now as to how we take care of those services, the requirements and the regulation by government, as well as wastewater treatment. I mean, there isn't anything out there under $1 million that needs to be even just maintained.
Yeah, and people don't realize that if you don't stay up with the laws that come down for EPA and the feds, they can shut you down just like that. And then what happens,
And fines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then that cost usually gets passed on to the taxpayer, and it's much higher than it would have been if you had maintained, the maintenance and everything else on your services. So.
Yes, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, before we get out of here, what would be your advice to some of the young people, Chuck? You've spent a couple of minutes on this planet and have quite a vast background. Would you offer any advice to someone, not necessarily just getting into politics, but just how to be successful in our community?
Well, I think they need to get involved. As you mentioned before, that we hardly see anybody at these meetings except when it affects them if there's a new subdivision coming in. But when there's meetings for, workshops for impact fees, whatever it is, services rendered, the comprehensive plan that we have out now, if you don't get involved and know both sides of the spectrum, you're just going to be behind the 8 ball, and that's when you're going to come in and maybe one meeting out of the year and complain about what's going up in your area. But you need to get involved. That's the whole thing, and we've had a poor record of that over the last, at least the 9 years I've been on the city council. And the only time we get a good crowd is when it affects your neighborhood.
Sure.
And I think they need to come in on other aspects of the businesses that we have coming in, as far as workshops on services and comprehensive plan workshops. I mean, you name it. They just need to get involved. That would be the advice that I'd have for them.
And the budget workshops are coming up, and
we have a lot of them coming up.
When I attended those, very few people that we didn't look around the room and recognize that weren't part of the government or part of a committee already, and that's why they were there. Very few citizens from our community.
You could count them on your one hand, most of them.
And that's when you get to come in and talk openly and freely about what's being discussed in the budget.
The argument can be made sometimes on the timing of that, relative to, is it from 6 to 9 or 6 to 10, or is it 4 o'clock in the afternoon? I wouldn't argue that point, but most of the time we've been trying to come up with times that would be palatable for all the taxpayers when they get off of work and everything. So.
Well, and you can certainly watch it online. The great thing about the budget is you don't vote on it till kind of the end. So if you still had a concern, you still have time to get a hold of. It's not like in a council meeting where you're voting right now. There's time in there to review. If you can't make it to all of them or you miss one, you can certainly review that and let your counselors know. So.
Yeah, July and August are usually pivotal months when we really get down to nitty-gritty and decide what that number is going to be. So you've got until the end of May, until that time, to get yourself versed on exactly what the demands are and what the costs are and all those good things.
Well, we certainly appreciate your time today.
Sure.
Is there anything I haven't covered that you would like to put out there? We touched on quite a few things today, and maybe we'll have you back we'll see what type of emails you get after this.
Yeah, so, I would imagine I'll get a few. I'm sure of that. So,
all right. Well, Chuck, we certainly appreciate you. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah.